So I've kind of been thinking about how people communicate lately, and the scary thing is that there are so many forms of communication. Now, if you're an able-bodied and able-minded person, you will primarily rely upon speech. It's the most natural, the easiest normally, and allows you to convey a lot of information in a short period of time. But not everyone has the ability to speak or necessarily comprehends speech, but can use alternate methods, or they find symbols and images easier to comprehend than they do speech. But there are an awful lot of forms of communication out there that can be used by people that don't rely upon speech or even written language to communicate. Now, I think the most mainstream kind of forms that most people know of are for those that are blind. Now, if you said to somebody, how would a blind person read a book or potentially communicate, they would probably say Braille. And that's right, Braille is often the most common form of written language for blind people. It's become that because it's basically the alphabet in a series of dots. And that's great. It gives them a way to communicate that doesn't rely upon some fancy system or having everything recorded in audio format. Now, I didn't realise though that there are several other forms of kind of tactile language available until recently. One that I've learnt of is called moon symbols, and it's similar to Braille in that it's a raised pattern that conveys a word, but it differs to Braille in that it's meant to be, I believe, kind of a simplified version of Braille in that it's not as complicated to learn or understand. And from what I've seen, a lot of it seems to be, so for example, if you look at the word book, it would look very similar to a sighted person to the word book written, but there would be a tactile element to it. Now, the way I've seen it done is using something called Zyfuse paper, which is a special kind of paper that you can print on, and then you run through a kind of heating process, and it causes the parts that are printed on to raise from the paper, and that allows text to basically leap off the page, and it allows you could type up a whole pages worth and books worth of content, and it wouldn't necessarily be much bigger than a normal book or normal text, but it would allow you to read it with your fingertips, which I still find fascinating. I think it's incredible that people can learn to do that. They can read through simply touch, and it goes to show the sheer miraculous way that the human mind works and how it processes information. But I also didn't realise there are so many other kind of ways that somebody who is blind or somebody who has a learning difficulty can communicate. And I kind of had a look at a few. So, for example, one way that somebody who's deaf might communicate is through sign language. And sign language alone, there are so many different forms, formats, systems in place. So I live in the UK, and in the UK, the primary form is BSL, British Sign Language, and that's great for us over here. But it differs to ASL and other kind of international sign language conventions. But then there are also loads of kind of sub thing involved with it. For example, I didn't know that till recently that you can have accents almost in sign, and that fascinates me. I think that's amazing that you can have accents within a kind of form of language that is done with your hands. But also there's something called Makaton, which is similar to BSL, has some differences, but it also has symbols that go along with it. And symbols are a whole other thing which I'll kind of get to. There are other kind of forms of sign, for example. So there's something called tactile sign language, where the person will put his or her hands over the signer's hands to feel the shape, movement, and location of the signs, and they may even kind of touch the person's face to kind of get a better understanding of kind of the emotion behind it. You can also have finger spelling, so that is where people could kind of spell words using just kind of fingers to represent letters or words. And I suppose the thing that I kind of struggle with is that there are so many ways that people communicate and interact with each other, and it kind of makes me wonder why we don't standardise. And there aren't a lot of areas, to be fair, that people standardise in anyway. Verbal language, for a start, that's not standardised. There have been attempts at creating a universal language, and that's failed miserably. But if you're mentally and physically capable, you can adapt easier than you could if you were physically or mentally handicapped. And it seems odd that in scenarios where somebody is physically or mentally challenged, that you're kind of bombarding them with several options, all of which could be wrong for them, or several of which could be right. And it then comes down to their personal preference, or even the instructor's personal preference as to which should be taught. But for example, sign language, it seems odd given that if you're deaf, you have no need for a verbal language. So why not have a worldwide sign language? I mean, yes, there are words in certain languages which don't exist in others and such, and I suppose it's kind of one of those things that you couldn't translate an entire language into sign. That would be very difficult to do. And yes, you might have to rely upon kind of spelling the word out. But for basic words, it seems odd that there isn't a kind of universal system or global system in place. But the same also applies, though, for visual communication methods. So I mentioned earlier about symbols, and sometimes symbols are used to kind of identify a place, a person, activity, object, things like that. So you might have a picture of a house to represent that you're at home, or a picture of a knife and fork to represent food or eating. And there are so many different symbol sets out there that people use. And the kind of main ones are, at least in the UK, you've got PCS, which is picture communication symbols. You've got widget symbols. You've then got symbol sticks and list symbols. And each one has its own kind of way of representing it. And yes, there are things which will be very close or very similar to between these sets. That's just kind of the way it is. For example, if you're trying to denote a car, you would have a picture of a car, you wouldn't have a picture of a tree to denote a car. It wouldn't make visual sense to anyone. But given that if you're having to use the symbols, you're more than likely working with people that need consistency in every single part of their lives, whether that be at home, at school, at work, out and about. It seems odd that you've got companies vying for the greatest market share, and it shouldn't be about that. It should be about making sure that the end user has the best experience that they can have, and that they feel comfortable no matter where they go, and that they can communicate no matter where they go. But I mean, like I said, I find it odd that things such as mental and physical disability often comes down to financial issues, or it all boils down to money, profits, market shares, things like this. And unfortunately, the companies that will do things for free kind of get overlooked because they don't have the money to put into development or promotion. So they kind of appear and disappear overnight, and some might kind of carry on in some way, shape or form, but 9 times out of 10 they won't really gain any traction with it. And it's not their fault, it's the fault of, I would say, a lot of these companies that are behind symbols and communication methods and all of this kind of market, as it were, making sure that nobody gets in the way of their profit margins or their market share, when it shouldn't be about any of that. Like I said, I feel that any aid that is offered to somebody, whether it be because they have a mental disability or a physical disability or both, that the care shouldn't come with the hidden agenda of making sure that this product is advertised or this particular product is used as opposed to another product. It should be about making sure the quality of care is the best that it can be, and that person can interact with anything and anyone at any time. And there are some kind of hidden standards that are used. For example, I found out about how in the UK, when you get to crossings, the pavement will change and the pavement will become tactile. And there are different patterns and shapes that are used to represent different scenarios or kind of situations as to what the area might be like or the terrain. And I thought that was fantastic, and that's standardised. But then that standard kind of ends at the pavement, and it's kind of, oh, it needs to carry on, it needs to be used in other scenarios. You need to be able to take that and expand it to the point whereby it's a whole set of touch and visual systems that make sure the user knows what is going on at all times. Because if you have a physical disability, such as blindness or you're deaf, you can lose out on so much information that is around you. For example, if you're blind and you go to a crossing, you might feel the pavement is different, so you know something, so you know you're at a crossing, but you won't see a crowd of people across the road. Maybe you won't see a car coming that wants to rush a yellow light. So you need to make sure that there are standards in place all along a route. And for example, you could have a small section on a lamppost that indicates this is a lamppost. And yes, it's one of those things that people would say, well, you just feel it and you'd kind of know it's a lamppost. And if you had sight, yes, you would. But if you feel something and it just feels like cold metal in a kind of cylinder form, you could think that's anything. But unfortunately, it doesn't happen. But yeah, and I think the main kind of point of this was that I kind of just wanted to go over some different forms of communication that are out there, and to kind of get across my gripe that there aren't any standards regarding communication for people that have some form of disability, when there really should. So yeah, I hope you listened to the end and hope it wasn't too boring. But thanks for listening if you did, and yeah, cheers and goodbye.